Hi, welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is bits and pieces, and what we're going to talk about is some news about the financial system of the world. Now, I've been listening last year, since last year is 2022, about the financial news, and I had to laugh. At the beginning of the Russian SMO, we used it just as a benchmark or as a reference point. The the gas prices in the world has already been starting to climb in 2021. And I actually made a video about this. And gas prices were climbing and climbing and climbing. And when the Russian SMO started, it increased the pricing significantly. It sort of pushed the prices a lot higher, but it's not that you could blame the SMO for the high gas prices. They were already climbing. And the reason it was given to us was that the Europe was changing from a long-term contracts to the spot price of gas. And the spot price of gas is basically traded on one of the hubs, and one of the hubs is the Netherlands TTF, and that's where basically the gas prices are determined on a daily basis. And that is what gas prices are being sold. And the Europeans have been convinced by, I don't know who, that it's better to work on spot prices than on long-term contracts, and they would save at the end of the day on the cost of energy. But it seems to me that is the wrong advice that was given to them. So gas prices have been climbing since 2021. Make no mistake about that. And, well, then Europe implemented sanctions against Russia. And, well, they cut themselves off from cheap Russian gas and even cheap Russian oil. And they decided to purchase gas in the form of LNG from America and from other countries as well. It's a little bit vague how successful they were in purchasing gas from other countries, but it seems to me that American gas has filled a fairly large gap. But one must remember that most of the gas that has been stored in the reservoir in Europe is still some of the old Russian gas that was still transferred to Europe before all these sanctions were put into place. And I have made videos about this as well. And I said, what will happen next year when this winter is past and most of the gas reserves has been consumed and there's little gas left in the reservoirs and they have to refill it? Well, it seems to me that, hell, I don't know. Apparently, the UK has stopped importing Russian gas, but that was already in October. And it wasn't that much because most of the gas was coming from America already in the form of LNG. But they're going to fill it up from Qatar and from Azerbaijan. Now, as far as I know, is that Qatar's production capability is already stretched. So I'm not totally sure how they're going to get gas from Qatar, because when Germany went to Qatar, Qatar asked Germany to invest in the plant and commit themselves to a 20-year commitment, gas prices, and Germany refused to do that. And therefore, in my opinion, Qatar hasn't upgraded its supply or its production facilities. So let's see how Britain is going to handle it and how Germany is going to handle it. As far as I also know is that a lot of LNG from America was supplied to the South America, which was their main market at that stage. But I think that the Americans had some surplus capacity and started to ship the gas to Europe. Now, again, gas prices are very high. They were up to 7 times higher than basically the normal price. And Europe was accusing America of these high prices of selling LNG gas to a level of 7 times the price that is being paid in America. But I also made a video about American supplier that says it's not them that charge the high prices. They have long-term contracts with European companies that do the transport and the shipping of LNG gas. And basically, these are the companies, the middleman, that is making the huge markups and the huge profits. So again, who the hell knows what's really going on? But in any case, the sanctions continue. Europe is going to cut themselves off totally from Russian gas, which is also not totally true. Because, yes, the Yamal pipeline has stopped delivering gas to Europe. Yes, the Nord Stream 1 has stopped delivering gas to Europe. But they're still flowing gas through the Ukrainian pipeline. And there's also a lot of gas still flowing from the Turkish pipeline. And according to the information I have, that's about 20% of the consumption of Europe. But the problem is, you don't know where this gas goes. And I believe that some of the gas that goes from the Turkish stream is more to Hungary and Serbia, and the lower part that are not that, or that got some exemption from the gas sanctions. So they still can buy gas from Russia. So that means France and Netherlands and Belgium and Germany, they are still battling to get gas from the world. Well, there's an article that says now that Germany acknowledged the new normal of high energy prices, which are there to stay. And that is according to the country's finance, the German finance minister. It says in an interview with the Bild newspaper, Christian Lindner, admitted that Berlin is facing the prospects of more expensive energy in the long term without Russian natural gas. And we do know what that means. That means higher prices, higher input costs to the industry, and the subsequent uncompetitiveness of German industry with the world. But no, that's not a caveat, actually. I wanted to say that the general narrative is that the euro has fallen against the US dollar, and the British pound has fallen against the euro dollar, and both of these currencies has weakened against the US dollar. No, unfortunately, that is not the case. If I look at our exchange rate from South Africa against the euro, that has remained the same. And our exchange rate against the British pound, that has remained the same. But our exchange rate with the US dollar has weakened. So basically, it's not Europe and the euro and the pound that has decreased in value. It is the American dollar that has increased in value compared to international currencies. So you could have argued, if you follow the normal Western narrative, that because the euro and pound has now sort of decreased in value, that means that the export will become cheaper to the rest of the world. But that's not the case. It will only become cheaper if for the export products that Europe delivers to America. And unfortunately, that is that. And they still have to compete now with the high energy prices to their competitors from the East and from other countries that also deliver products to America. But in any case, this increases of, again, a false narrative. There's Christian Lindner says that the sanctions or the increase in gas price, which is due to Russia's fault and the SMO, saw the inflation soar across the whole EU. But again, inflation was already, if you look at the data, inflation already was rising in 2021, and that was mainly to do with the lockdowns during COVID periods, the low production, the high demand for products, the interruption of supply lines, and the interruption of production itself because people were locked down and stayed at home. And that created a demands force, and that created inflation. And that started in 2021, and it was exacerbated, that's the correct English word for it, by the Russian SMO. And the self-inflicted damage caused to the Euro zone and America by the stupid sanctions that they implemented against Russia. But the Eurozone has now, the EU has decided to put a price cap on the wholesale, and that will only be effective once the gas price reaches about 180 euros per megawatt hour. But the gas price has increased in the last couple of weeks, and it's now currently traded on the Netherlands TTF hub at 73 euros per megawatt. But just for the sake, in period between 2017 and 2019, the TTF gas spot price were trading in the region of between 10 and 25 euros. So even the current price is still about 3 to 4 times higher than what it was traded before all these problems started, before COVID. And if we consider the 180 euro price per megawatt, which is still very, very, very high, you can say about between 7 and 8 times the normal price. As you can see, things don't look too lekker, but the EU and the Euro countries have brought it on themselves. Now, I've been following the American economy for a long time, especially since 2008. And according to all financial advisors and gurus and experts, there should be every maximum period of 10 years, then there should be a financial crisis and a financial collapse. And this has usually happened. But when in 2008 financial crisis happened, the monetary authorities decided, no, they're not going to let it happen. They have to save the financial systems, meaning the big investment houses and the bank systems and insurance companies and the big boys, and basically they had to prop them up, and then they implemented quantitative easing. That means printing money, and then basically lending it to their banking systems in order to increase their liquidity at very near to zero interest rates, and in Europe even to negative interest rates. And they were printing $billion or billion euros per month and handing it out to the privileged people. Now, the aim was actually that these institutions should prop up their balance sheet and then lend out the money to the consumers. But it's not what they did. They invested in the stock exchange, and the stock exchange prices rose until the price became totally artificially, and it had no connection with their own underlying principles. So evaluating a company's price to earnings ratio became basically impossible to determine. And what the companies also did is they bought back their lend money at near zero interest, it's fine, and bought back their own shares. So the little profit that they made, they could divide by less shares, and therefore have a higher earning per share ratio. And that is supposed to bullshit all investors and let them buy some shares. But unfortunately, also the interest rate was very low. So people, insurance companies and pension funds had to make a profit and in order to cover their liabilities and towards their members. And they had to invest it, and unfortunately, interest rates were too low, and they had to invest that money into higher risk assets, which is stocks. Now, the American authorities believe that a high stock price is a good sign for the American economy. But that's actually a fallacy. That's wrong. But that is how they perceive it. And the dollar is always considered as a safe haven. But that is also a fallacy. But like all people, they believe what the American newspapers say. And they are following it. It's like sheep, dumb sheep, following the front sheep, even if it means falling down the cliff. But they're following the same principles. They're always fleeing to the dollar, even if the American economy is not that good. And there have been many news articles about supply chain problems. People can't get parts to manufacture it. There's a huge deficit in electronic chips, if you want to call them, and electronic parts. And to such a stage that there are many American vehicles in the motor industry that are standing on parking lots that cannot be completed because they lack the necessary electronic components. And there's a huge backlog, and all of this was created during the COVID period where we had these lockdowns. And we even know that China still had a zero policy against COVID, and they regularly implemented lockdowns in their own industry. But recently, they have lessened that policy, and they have decided not to go into these strict lockdowns. But this is now supposed to have caused a huge increase in COVID cases. But if I look at the data, about 80% of those COVID cases are non-symptomatic. So the tests are positive, but the people don't show any symptoms. So one has to ask the question, hey, what's going on there? But China is the biggest powerhouse production house. So if China doesn't produce, then the world will have a shortage of components. And so that also plays a big role. And then we have the IMF. Well, sorry, before we go ahead with that, just remember that the inflation in America is also about 10%. I'm not going to 9%, it's all the same, more or less 10%. In the UK, it's more than 10%. In Europe, it is more than 10%, but it differs between 10 and 20%. So it's a little bit more varied about that, but that's inflation. Increase in prices. And it started before the Russian SMO. And the inflation was mostly caused by the West printing money in order to sustain and support their industries and the population during the COVID lockdowns. In fact, America added about $7 trillion worth to their national debt, which was spent in order to prop up the civilization or the population of America, giving them free money to spend. And they did spend it. And they spent it on products that couldn't be easily replaced because of the supply line disruptions. And that's where all the inflation started. In Europe, we have similar stuff. Inflation caused by money printing, billions and billions and trillions of euros. And the rule goes so, the more money you print, the more you dilute your currencies, and the more you dilute your currency, the less you can actually, the value becomes of that, and therefore you create inflation. That is the normal economic principle. So the world is in turmoil financially. But it doesn't seem to me that the financial institutions want to recognize it. We heard many times last year, at the beginning of last year, that the inflation is going to be small, it's going to be transitional, it's going to be not have a big effect, and then they change their tune, and now inflation is increasing. No, but inflation is going to drop next year. Sorry to say, inflation is not going to drop. There are systematic problems in the financial system itself. And I will actually make a separate video about this whole matter. But I read today an article by the IMF, and what's her name? Kristalina Georgieva, who is the head of the IMF, says a third of the world economy will be hit by recessions in 2023. Now remember the definition of recession. That is 2 consecutive quarters where there is negative growth in the industry. And that was observed in the US. But somehow the US decided now they changed the definition in order to suit their narrative. America is not in a recession. Everything is hunky-dory. The labor market is still increasing. And, well, America is not in a recession. But if the same rules apply to the European countries, then European countries are in a recession. But there were also a lot of reports about the American labor market, which is a farce in any case. People don't want to work. People resign from work because they have experienced a better work relationship while during the COVID lockdowns and working from home. And at this stage, they don't want to go back to work, and they are actually being threatened with being fired by the industry if they don't come and go back to the office. And there is huge amount of office space that's available and empty. So in the property market for office space, there's also huge problems. So, you know, if you read here and you read there and you read there, and you find a lot of different problems which are not a summary is always, you know, gels with a summary that certain institutions or the government, the American government or the Reserve Bank, American Reserve Bank tries to convey. And trust me, they're all lying. So we go back to this article, and it says, typically, this year is expected to be even tougher than 2022 as the US, EU, and China's economies slow down. Please remember, US, EU, and China's economies. The Ukraine conflict, soaring prices, high interest rates, and unrelenting COVID in China will continue to exert an impact on the global economy. That's the one that she said to CBS. We expect 1/3 of the world economy to be in recession. Even countries that are not in recession, it would feel like recession for hundreds of millions of people. I'm not sure what she refers to. In October, the IMF slashed its outlook for global economic growth in 2023. Yes, it was constantly reviewed. It was constantly moved downwards. And it still said, no, 2023 is going to be all right. Citing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, along with the tougher monetary policies pursued by central banks around the world in an effort to rein in rising prices, including energy costs. So, Ukraine conflict getting the blame, as typically expected, not themselves. The monetary policies are increasing, so the reserve banks are increasing the interest rate, and I think the Americans are now at 5%, but inflation is at 10%. So it's still way, way below 1 in order to rein inflation. You have to be high, the interest must be higher than the inflation, otherwise it's not going to really work. Same goes for Europe. Europe has delayed the increases in interest rate, and I think they're probably on 2 or 3%, which is still far away from the 10%. So I'm not sure how this tougher monetary policy is really going to work. And according to Georgieva, China will face a difficult start to 2023 as the world's second biggest economy is likely to grow at or below the global growth for the first time in 40 years. Now, the usual normal world growth is about 2.5%. That's global expected growth. So China is going to have less growth than that. But if you read other stuff again, last year, China was actually importing a lot of gas from Russia and then converting it to LNG and then exporting that LNG to Europe. They have now stopped that export of LNG. Why? Because they need it domestically. Russia has also said that they have a record delivery of gas to China. So Russia delivers more gas to China. China stops the export of LNG, so it consumes that gas. And that's because they have a higher energy requirement, which means they have higher production, which means they have probably growth about this. Isn't it like that? Or is China going to have less growth than 2.5%, which is not going to be this year in any case, because she predicts that the global growth will be a lot less, probably I think 0.8%. I think that's the latest figure, but I'm not totally sure. So China is going to have a growth of less than 0.8%. Are you still believing all this crap that's being spewed by the so-called experts? In any case, for the next couple of months, it will be tough for China, and the impact on Chinese growth would be negative. The impact on the region will be negative. The impact on global growth will be negative. That's what she warns for China. Forget about the inflation in America and Europe. Forget about that the people in Europe can basically barely afford the higher energy prices and have no extra money for spending, discretionary spending. Forget about that. Forget about the fact that Americans have no money in order to spend on proper goods. As far as I remember, Black Friday sales were way, way down. So they have no money. But China is going to have no growth. But here comes the caveat. When it comes to the US, Georgina called the nation the most resilient, adding that it might avoid recessions with the labor market remaining quite strong. This is a mixed blessing because if the labor market is very strong, the Fed, that means the Federal Reserve, might have to keep interest rates higher for longer to bring inflation down. So everybody has a recession, everybody has higher inflation, nobody has high growth except for the American economy. Why? Only because they have a high demand for labor. But why do they have a high demand for labor? Because people don't want to work. They want to work from home. And therefore, I read an article, they were resigning. But the labor numbers in any case in America are skewed. There are 3 different types of labor rates. And the one that's always quoted, 75% of that number is actually thumbsucked. It's not based on numbers or counted numbers. It's on thumbsucked, estimated, according to some or other formula. But the second number, labor employment number, and the third one is a lot worse. But that one is never quoted by the financial gurus. Because it lets American industry look bad. Then we also hear that the prices on the Dow Jones has dropped last year, about 20%. I think the S&P 500 has dropped by 30%, and the Nasdaq has dropped by 40%. Or, yeah, I think that's, or is the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq's reversed? I'm not sure. But that's about what it is. Then we hear that Tesla's shares has dropped significantly. Elon Musk is the only person that has lost more than $200 billion in a year. Facebook is down. Twitter is down. Google is down. Everybody's firing people, huge amount of people, but America has a strong labor force. Does it make sense for you? No. So what does the industry really have then? Okay, so they exported more gas to Europe. That's good. But gas is a product that is being mined. It doesn't require more labor. And as far as I understand, when I read the reports about the fracking industry is not investing in more drilling. Why? Because fracking is not a profitable enterprise. It does supply gas and oil, yes, but if you look at the input money versus the output money, that isn't profitable. And it has been going on a negative trend for how many years? And it's a declining industry, and a lot of people have lost a lot of money in the fracking industry. And if they make now some more profit, they want now that little bit of return on their money that they can achieve. But they're not investing in new wells. And fracking, you have to continuously drill more wells. English word, sorry. Wells. Yeah, okay, wells. It's not like the Texas oil type of thing. You have to continuously drill more, and it's a rapid decline in the first year of volume per well. And then you have to drill some more. And all the biggest basins are basically depleted. There's only, I think, one basin that still delivers a fair amount of oil and gas from fracking. So that industry is also dying, and they're not investing in new drills, and the export of gas from those wells will decrease in the following one. Then I also talked about the supply chain issues that hasn't been resolved yet. So there's still a limit on production capability. If you want to produce something good, there's still a demand for goods that cannot be delivered. So there's still inflation that will increase. Okay, oil prices are slowly coming down, yes, but that is what's predicted by the OPEC Plus cartel in any case. But it had a recent rise again in oil prices, but it's going to come down again. And that rise was due to the oil cap that was implemented by the Americans, which is currently failing in any case. But it will sort of wangle the numbers at this stage. And then, the military-industrial complex. Yes, record military spending again by the Americans. And they have to replenish all the weapons sent to Ukraine. You know, they have to replenish all the obsolete old stuff again, build new stuff. The Americans were in any case not using it. You know, of the $110 billion that was currently approved for Ukraine, only $20 billion was in military aid by America. So let's call it $80 billion is money laundered. And then they have approved another $40 billion, which is again going to be laundered. And some idiot's going to have a nice cushy income. But it's going to take the military-industrial complex, how do they say? It's going to take them 3 years or 4 years to replenish the Stinger missiles, and 3 years to do the javelins, and it's going to take them a year to build a couple of NASAM systems, and it's going to take time. Why? Because they don't have the necessary facilities and manpower. So does that tell you that the American economy is going to grow significantly more than the Chinese? In the meantime, we have the establishment of the alternative world market, the multipolar world that is established between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Indians, and the BRICS countries, and Asian countries, and that's where the business is going to be. That's where the growth will be. It's not going to be in the West. going to be there because that's the new markets that are being developed. But as usually, the IMF, no. Those countries will not grow. America will grow. America that has no more serious production capability, that has a world reserve currency that is now being discarded by the multipolar world. It will still be valued for the next couple of years and so on, but the impact will decline. Trade is being conducted in local currencies. Trade, oils and gas is sold in local currencies. So the power, this parasitic influence that the dollar had on the world, where the world was basically subsidizing the Americans' lifestyle, that is slowly and continuously starting to decline. And because the Americans is also mostly a financial powerhouse in terms of financial systems, well, they have committed harakiri by denying insurance to Russia. And Russia is the second biggest producers of oil, and now they have to convey that by ships to other countries, which require ships, which require insurance. And now it's going to be covered by Chinese insurance and the Russian insurance company. So the financial impact is not going to go to London, it's not going to go to America. So those are also going to decrease. And we already see that social media is having a hard time because of their cancel culture and lack of a reduction in advertisement revenue, etc., etc. So, who's still believing all this nonsense? Who is still being bamboozled by the strong American economy? Who is still bamboozled by the strong European economy? Isn't it says that Europe will now become deindustrialized? How do these things gel? On the one side, they say one thing, and on the other side, they say the other thing, and it's like having the bread buttered on both sides. And that doesn't gel. That doesn't make sense. And that's why we ask these questions. But there will always be some idiots. There will always be the dumb sheep that will follow the leader down into the abyss. Any case, I thought it would be interesting to hear what the IMF director has to say. IMF chief. So let's watch out. What does the American chief of the American Reserve Bank say? And the ECB say. And then we will listen again and have a fun about the absolute rubbish and nonsense they are talking. So that's my story for today. If you haven't, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, spread the word, press the bell button. And until next time, cheers.